My name's Rachel Henley. I am almost approaching a year as new staff with Virginia Farm Bureau with Martha in the Governmental Relations Department. We're super excited that you came to join us this morning for this new session, Farmer to Farmer. This was brought up by a county that wanted to hear and have conversations and learn from a fellow farmer. So we're super excited that our first farmer and producer member from Rockbridge County is Steve Hart. He'll be joining us today. He is a professional registered engineer since 1993. He's had the privilege, or maybe torture, of teaching at VMI, West Point, and worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. He is a farmer in Rockbridge County. He said we drove right past or through his farm almost on the way here down 81. So we're super excited for him to be here today to talk about solar energy on the electrical grid. I think this is a topic that has touched a lot of folks in rural Virginia, all across the state. So we're super excited to have Steve join us here today. Thank you.
All righty. Okay, thank you for coming. For starters, what we're not going to talk about today are solar fencers, solar water pumps, solar on your house. We're not even going to talk about whether or not you should lease out a portion of your farm for solar, because all that works from the bottom up. We're going to talk about it from the other end. We're going to talk about this from the perspective of our electrical grid, and if we were to implement the Virginia Clean Economy Act, what would it actually take to do that? To put it another way, those pictures there, the upper left is my farm. The lower right is the solar field that is across the street from my farm. Those pictures were taken within the same week of each other, 3 weeks after it rained, after the drought. And basically, we're going to talk about how much farmland we're going to have to convert to solar fields. To do this, we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about the law, the electric grid, what we are currently doing on the land, and where this might go into the future. And we're going to get my best guess at it. So first off, the law. We're going to start with the Virginia Clean Economy Act. These pages are lifted straight off the Virginia Legislative Information Service. The one on one side, my left, yeah, your left too, is House Bill 1526, which is the Virginia Clean Economy Act. It states that we will produce 100% of our electricity from renewable sources by 2045 or 2050. And we will acquire some level of energy storage there. And remember those numbers. Also, in our law, in the Code of Virginia, is the Commonwealth's energy policy. It says we will develop energy resources to produce 30% of our electricity in 2030, that's 5 years from now, and 100% of the electricity from carbon-free sources by 2040. Now, definitions matter. And so I tried to find all these definitions of these terms in the laws. I couldn't find them. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying I couldn't find them. Because what always comes up when you discuss this is, well, what about nuclear? The answer is I don't know. Our current administration wants an all-of-the-above approach. Dominion Energy in their integrated resource plan wants an all-of-the-above approach. But that's what the law says. Renewable and carbon-free. Now, does that count nuclear? I don't know. But I can tell you this. The same interest that got this law passed in Virginia, in New York State, got Indian Point 2 and 3 shut down, a nuclear plant which provided 25% of the electricity to New York City, shut down Vermont Yankee in Vermont, and then threw a fit when they had to put up more transmission lines to bring power from Hydro-Quebec, and got 3 of the 4 nuclear power plants in California shut down. So until somebody writes into a law that nuclear is okay, I'm not going to believe that it is and going to act accordingly. There is also the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. This is off of the EPA's website. You don't have to read it, but the point I want to bring out there is there are lots of subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act that go to support renewable energy. This headline is from the Motley Fool the day after the election. 3 of the largest energy stocks, solar energy stocks in the United States, took a nosedive. The reason being, this statement from First Solar, the largest of those stocks, 2/3 of their operating income, their profit, came from the Inflation Reduction Act. Right? So there is a lot of your tax dollars that are going to support this. So when you look at those two things, I mean, we've had solar panels for years and years and years. So why all of a sudden the solar boom? Well, it's a combination in Virginia of the law and the subsidies that are provided by the United States government. So that's important to know. Now we got to go back to high school physics. Okay? And part of the reason we have to do this is, you know, if you back up, energy regulation used to be something that was done by the State Corporation Commission, the federal government, but now it's actually something done by every county board of supervisors in the Commonwealth. Everybody is involved in this. And so we kind of ought to understand what we're doing. And again, terms matter. Power and energy, these things get thrown around interchangeably, and they're not. Power is the time rate of doing work. It is the size of an engine. In electricity, we measure it in watts, kilowatts, megawatts, and gigawatts. Energy is the capacity to do work. It's the size of your gas tank. Right? So it is power through time. So I got a little graph there. You go out at an instant, you measure power. So I got a power level there. I do it again, and I got a different power level. In another minute, I do it again, and I keep doing it, and I've got all these power levels. If I take the area under that curve, that's the energy. That's how the two are related. So the electrical grid has to supply enough power, and it has to supply enough energy. To use a farming analogy, your tractor's got to have a big enough engine, and it's got to have enough fuel in the tank. It's got to have both. And so be very careful when you listen to someone talk about, oh, we're going to supply all the energy needs. Well, the question is, okay, can you supply the power? Or we're going to supply the power needs. Okay, at which point of the daytime? So either of those that are said begs another question. So here's scale for power, just to get an idea what these mean. A watt's really small, but a kilowatt, 1,000 watts, that's what a coffee pot pulls. You plug in your average coffee pot, you're pulling a kilowatt worth of power. A megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. Two of these 700 horsepower tractors, that's a megawatt, give or take a little bit. And 1 gigawatt is the typical power output of a commercial nuclear reactor. Not a plant, because a plant often has 2 reactors, but one single reactor is about a gigawatt. So important to understand the scale. Let's talk about electrical infrastructure. Every infrastructure system has 6 functions. Count them 6, and I'm going to show them to you. You got to have all 6. If you only have 5, you got 0. And it doesn't matter which 5 you have. You must have all 6. First, we're going to generate it. We have to make it. Second, we're going to do bulk transmission. We're going to move large quantities, long distances with limited access. Nobody actually connects to the bulk transmission system. Then we're going to distribute it. We're going to move small quantities, short distances, and we're going to connect that to a user. Now, does that look familiar to anybody? Has anybody seen those 3 terms before? If you tell me no, I'm going to tell you what you haven't done. You haven't looked at your power bill. Because if you actually look at your power bill, there's a generation charge, a transmission charge, and a distribution charge. You pay for all 3 of those separately. The 4th one, is use. It's the most important one. Somebody wants it, in this case electricity, and will pay. Ideally, that is the same person. But with federal subsidies, it is often not the same person. Every infrastructure, I don't care what it is going to produce waste. We'd like to repurpose it, reuse it, and recycle it. We usually just bury it. And finally, there's a coordination piece that makes this thing all run together. It's a big, complicated system, and it all has to hang together. Take out any one of the 6 functions, and it doesn't work. Now, this becomes very important to each of you when these are being discussed at your county board of supervisors. When you discuss one part of an infrastructure system, you must discuss the other 5 functions as well. And a great example is the data centers we're seeing exploding all over Virginia. Data centers are a user in the electrical and the water infrastructure. Developer comes in and says, I want to build a data center. No, it does all this stuff. Okay, you get to build your data center. Well, 3 weeks later, somebody comes in and says, I got to put up another distribution line. And then somebody comes in and says, we got to put up a transmission line. And then somebody says, where are we going to get the power? Because we didn't ask those questions the first time. So whenever you hear anybody talk about one of these functions, ask about the other 5 functions. And I know Loudoun County and Maryland are dealing with this right now with their transmission, battles of transmission lines. All right, here's this thing called the grid. We hear it all talk about time, the electrical grid. Actually, in the United States, we have 3. We have an Eastern, a Western, and Texas. And Texas always gets a bad rap about this, but it's really not. Anybody been to Texas? Whole lot of nothing. Drive for 8 hours, you're still in Texas. All right, and this is a function of how the electrical grid grew. It started in the cities and it grew outward, right? Since there's a whole lot of nothing in the outskirts of Texas, there was just nothing there for years and years and years. And so the 3 grids do not interconnect. So here's a trick question. All questions are trick questions. In the Eastern Interconnect, which is where we are, how many machines are there? I know the answer. Anybody want to take a guess? What's that, Ann? 1. You've heard this before. One. There's one machine. It's all one machine. All the generators are spinning in sync. All the motors are spinning in sync. All the clocks, at least when we had manual clocks, you know, the old flippy clocks, are all tied to the electrical grid. They take their time off of the electrical grid. All of it's in sync. Was anybody in the Navy? Anybody in the Navy? Engineer on a ship by any chance? When you pull that ship into the port and you want to shut the engine down and connect to shore power, what do you have to do? Okay? But the electrical grid, what you have to do is you have to sync the electrical system of the ship to the grid. If you don't do that, you'll actually tear the electrical system of the ship apart. So all of these things function in synchronization. And that's what these interconnections do. So the big dots there are your regional load balancing authorities. They are responsible for balancing load and generation and keeping everything operating in synchronous time within their portions of the grid. So our interconnect here in Virginia and in the central Northeast is PJM. If you paid attention, you probably hear them. And this is what they do. They run a seesaw. The coordination function is the balancing act. We balance generation and use. Generation and use are in perfect balance. They have to be maintained in absolute perfect balance. Can't have any electricity. If you have too little generation, you have a blackout. Everybody's lights go out. If you have too much generation, the frequency increases and the grid starts to run away from itself. All the equipment will tear itself apart, but the grid shuts down so it doesn't do that. So generation and use, perfectly balanced. Anybody remember the Northeast blackout of 2003? Power tree came down, touched a power line, shorted something out, and in about 30 seconds, large chunks of the Northeast were grounded out. And it happened because generation and load got out of balance, and the grid shut down to protect itself. So use varies. It varies from time of day, it varies from time of year, it varies from weekday to weekend, it varies when the Super Bowl shows up, right? All of these things cause the power demand to vary, and so those load balancing authorities have to tailor generation to follow that. Both of those curves follow each other exactly. And if they don't, the grid shuts down. It's really important to understand that, to understand the challenges with solar. Oh, we do this every second of the year. 3,536,000 times. So we don't have one grid. We have 3,536,000 grids. Because every second the load is changing. So the generation has to change to match it. If it doesn't, the grid crashes and shuts down. So here's the solar problem. This is actual solar radiation data from January in Carrs Creek, Virginia. It's how much sunlight is hitting the ground. Don't pay any attention to the numbers on the left, because if you're trying to do solar power, you want more power, you just put out more panels. The shape is the same, the scale is different, that's why the scale doesn't matter. So one day it's really sunny. The other day it's cloudy in the morning, and of course it's dark at night. So we have a variable power generation coming from solar. There's a load example. That's not a real one, I just made it up. It looks about like that though. It's low at night, picks up in the morning, goes up in the day, tends to spike depending on where you are around supper time if you have a high residential area. And so the question is, how do you get the blue line to match the orange line? Well, all of those peaks we've got to somehow store and dump into the holes. Into the holes for the next day, into the holes for the night. All right? Can we store electricity? No, can't. What can we do with it though? You can do a battery. You can convert chemical energy into battery. You can convert it to potential energy with a pump storage unit. You can convert it to heat energy and store it in a bucket of sand. So there's all sorts of things you can do to store it, but you can't store the electricity. If you have too much, you have to store it. What happens if we can't do anything with that big peak where generation exceeds demand on solar? We actually disconnect the solar field from the grid. It can't be on the grid. If it's making too much power, it has to be disconnected. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. Let's talk about replacing natural gas with solar. What would it actually take to do this? And we're going to look at one plant. That natural gas plant is Brunswick County. It's one of Dominion's plants in Brunswick County, obviously. It produces 1,358 megawatts. That's the peak generation for it. If you run it for 24 hours, that's 32,592 megawatt hours. Turn it on, pull the lever to max, let it run for 24 hours. It makes 1,358 megawatts. It does it for 24 hours. You get a constant amount of power. That thing's really efficient. It's really good at what it does. Let's talk about replacing that with solar. What would it take? So this solar field is in Spotsylvania County. It's actually been built. I've been following it for 6 or 8 years now. On their numbers, 1 megawatt is installed on 12.5 acres. Take the total area, divide it by the number of megawatts. It's 12.5 acres per megawatt. It makes a variable power, right? So it's nothing at night. It's low in the morning and the evening, and it's peak at noon. Right, so how do we convert something that's variable power to something that's constant power and get a comparison? We have to do this with a thing called capacity factor. And there's lots of ways you can calculate it. You can take the total energy produced over a period of time and divide it by the time. So how much energy did I make in a day and divide it by 24 hours? You can take the average power divided by the rated power. The rated power is the data plate. So if it says it's a 500 megawatt system, that's the rated power. And when you do that, you take that variable power and convert it to a flat line. But it differs, right? Because the sun's keeping banker's hours right now, and we don't get much sunlight. So in December, the capacity factor in Virginia is 12.5 or 12.5%. So if you take that rated power, multiply it by 12.5%, that's what you get as your average power. It's highest in highest in June at 33%. In Virginia, the average capacity factor across the year is about 22. Varies with a few things, but close enough for what we're going to discuss today. So if I do that, how many solar panels does it take to make 1,358 megawatts? Well, when do you want me to do it? June, March, or December? Anybody want to make a decision? June. Yeah, everybody wants June. Well, if you do it in June, it doesn't work for the rest of the year because you don't have enough. Everybody wants it to work all year long, right? Because it's cold right now and we want to heat things. So we're going to do it in December. So if we make it work in December, what does that mean for the rest of the year? It's too much. You're overbuilt. You're either underbuilt or overbuilt except on 2 days of the year. Now, why does this matter? If you look in California right now, I read an article this week, and particularly in Germany, if you paid attention in Germany during the summer, you'll see that solar power is so cheap, the price actually went negative. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a bad thing, because you're having to pay somebody not to put it on the grid. It's like paying people not to farm land. We wouldn't do that, would we? But that's actually what happens. You're overbuilt or underbuilt. But keep in mind the capacity factor is an average. And we got a pretty good sized group here, right? So in any parameter, I hate to tell you this, half of you are below average. By definition, I may be in that half, right? So if you're doing something on average, half the time it doesn't work. That's not acceptable in the electric grid. I mean, we hear everybody complaining about our electric grid, but dadgummit, how many minutes out of the year does our electricity not work usually? 12. It's pretty doggone reliable compared to a bunch of other stuff. Now, so that's the question. How much does it take? Well, it depends. And then how much land does it take? Well, look at that area over there on the right. In the summer, it takes 80 square miles. In the winter, it takes 212. Okay, so what is 200? What is in the middle? It's 120. What does that look like? 120 square miles is the pasture land and cropland of Rockbridge County, Virginia. 212 square miles is the pasture land, the cropland, and the timberland. So to replace one gas-fired power plant, one, assuming we could solve a bunch of stuff, which we can't, but if we could, it takes all of Rockbridge County. Bye. Oops, come on. Uh-oh. There, technology. There is 5 days worth of solar radiation in January right outside of my house. Got it off the internet. You might recognize a couple of those. I rearranged them earlier because I needed them in a different order. The 2 low days there were snow days. There is 12.5%. So I got to get that to fill in that hole and that to fill in that hole. But what fills in over here? Can I make enough on these 2 days to fill in these 2 holes and these 2 peaks and these 2 holes, and can I store it? I don't know. This is what we have for storage in Virginia. Right here in Bath County, we have the largest battery, at least in the Western Hemisphere. I think the Chinese might have built a bigger one. It's a pump storage plant. We take water from down here, we pump it up here at night. When electricity is cheap, in the daytime, we let it go from up here to down here, and we sell it. 3,000 megawatts, 24,000 megawatt hours, so it'll run for 8 hours. It's 80% efficient. So to get those 24,000 megawatt hours out, we have to put in 30,000 megawatt hours. It makes negative energy but positive money. And how to do that? How? Your power bill is the same regardless of when you use the power. If you're an industrial customer, it actually varies from time of day. At night, we have lots of extra power, so it's cheap. During the day, we don't have extra power, so it's expensive. So what they do is they pump it up at night for 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and they run it down in the daytime and make 10 cents a kilowatt hour, and they make money on the margins. And they make a lot of money fast. It takes about one of these to replace the electric, to make the same power as the gas-fired power plant. We currently have one in Virginia. And remember, the Virginia Clean Economy Act says we have to get storage. Well, it takes one of these to meet the requirement of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. One, and we already have one. The picture on the bottom is Pacific Gas and Electric out of California. They're doing a lot of battery storage units. This is pretty typical, 180, 200 megawatts for power, 700 to 800 megawatt hours, so they'll run about 4 hours. That's about all they got out of them. To make the same power as our gas-fired power plant, we need 44 of those. To meet the requirements of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, we need 15. What's in the Virginia Clean Economy Act is budget dust. It won't do it. It's just math. Let's look at what we're actually doing in solar in Virginia. So this is Spotsylvania County. I've been following this for a lot of years. 6,350 acres in multiple parcels. You can see it right there. Interesting. When I first started looking at it, was advertised as a 500 megawatt AC power plant. If you go to their website now, it says it's 617 megawatts. Did it get bigger? No. Note the subscripts. AC and DC, direct current and alternating current. Solar panels make power at direct current like your battery, and we put it on the grid at alternating current. You've got to run it through an inverter to do that. The inverters on average are about 12.5% efficient, so you're going to lose things. You're going to lose an amount of power in that inversion. So why'd they go from 500 to 617? Looks good. That's right. It looks bigger. Now I had to change my presentation this morning because of something I saw last night. This is out of the, the Virginia Mercury. And this right here, this commentary explains why it is so vitally important that we actually understand the words that we're using, because we have to get them right. Virginia Mercury says, commentator says, one 600 megawatt data center recently approved in Caroline County will use the equivalent of as much electricity produced in Spotsylvania County solar farm, which covers 3,500 acres. Is that statement true or false? It's false. Well, it might be true for a few minutes a day. First, he read the 600 and he looked at 600 megawatts DC. He should have looked at 500 megawatts AC, so he didn't know that difference. And second, only on the sunniest of days does it produce 600 megawatts. At night, it produces 0. If you actually wanted to look at the energy consumption of that data center, it's 600 megawatts times 24 hours. So if we're going to do that, we got to apply a capacity factor to our 500 megawatts. Let's just say it's 600 because it makes the math easy. Capacity factor, we want the internet to work in the wintertime, so we're going to use a 12.5%. That means times 8. That means we actually need 8 of these. Assuming we could solve the storage problem, which we can't, we need 8 of these. I tried to do all these numbers to remember in my head. 8, let's see, that's 44 square miles, if I remember correctly. 44 square miles to supply one data center. Let's make it 40 because that'll make the math easy. How many data centers are there in Virginia? I tried to look it up. I think it's over 400. Let's say it's 400. 400 times 40. 4 times 4 is 16, and there's 3 zeros. 16,000 square miles. Did I do that math right? I think I did. 16,000 square miles just for our data centers. Anybody know how much farmland's in Virginia? I got that number later. Woodbridge Solar in Albemarle County. Albemarle County's put up a lot of them, or at least approved them. This one, 138 megawatts, 2,300 acres. It used to be industrial timber. We're going to restore timberland by turning it into solar panels. That's what their website says. Pennsylvania County, 1,500 acres, 120 megawatts. Look at the way it's cut up. These big sites are all cut up like that. They're wrapped around houses and roads and other facilities. This one's going to serve Amazon Web Services in Arlington. They like to say they're going to do that. Charlotte County. Charlotte County's interesting. 2 projects, 7 more are approved. 1,500 megawatts, 27,000 total acres. I mean, look at the Randolph Solar project there. I mean, I don't know a lot about it other than what I read. I've never been to Charlotte County. But that solar project is bigger than all of the cities, towns, and other things in Charlotte County. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. The UVA Weldon Center, I found this a couple weeks ago, has a really good database, tells you what's been approved, what the status, what's not been approved. I've tried to pull the numbers. I think I'm about right, but I'm reading them all off of graphs. They don't have an actual table. 315 have been approved, probably 316 because Rockbridge County just approved another one, totaling 220 square miles and 15,177 megawatts. That's what we've approved in Virginia so far. So where are we going? This is Dominion Energy, their integrated resources plan that they have submitted to the Commonwealth. Their forecasted power in the next 15 years will double. It's gigawatt hours there on the left, but it doesn't matter what it is. It's going to double, times 2. If you read it, the question's why. Data centers are most of them. Population use doesn't actually change very much. Residential use doesn't change much. We're not sure what the impact of electric vehicles are going to be on that. We're not sure what some of the other impacts are going to be. How many of you heat with propane? I do, okay? Everybody wants us to convert to heat pumps right now, right? Well, that's going to add more to this grid. Going to be a lot of changes. So that's what their forecast is. So here's the question. This is the question. And I don't think anybody knows the answer to it. I don't know the answer to it. I got a guess. It's a bad guess. It's not good, but in 2045, when we are required to get all of our energy from renewable or carbon-free sources, how many square miles are covered in solar panels? What is the demand? And how do we map one of those into the other one with battery storage? Because you have to do it. On solar and wind, you cannot control the generation. You can shut it off, but you can't make it go on. So if it's on, what have you got to do to store it so you can use it? You can read articles out of California. They're facing this right now. They have way too much generation, not enough transmission, not enough distribution, and no way to store it. Because they talked about one of the 6 functions of infrastructures. Let's do some math. Here's a thumbnail. I always tell people, it's like, if I'm wrong, because I tell people I'm probably wrong. But if you're going to tell me I'm wrong, you got to show me how the math's wrong. You got to do the math and prove me wrong. Take the annual energy report from Dominion, divide it by 365. That takes 713 megapacks that I showed you before to store it for 24 hours. 22 pump storage units in Bath County. Takes 22, we got 1. You divide that by 24, you get the hourly average. That's how much our generation has to be. 21 gigawatts, that's what we need. Divide that by 12.5% because we want it to work in December and January. That comes out to 173,516 megawatts installed. That's 3,329 square miles. Add some stuff for conversion efficiencies, and you're at 30% of the farmland in Virginia. It's 30%. It's a third of our farmland. Is that right? I don't know. But I will tell you this. Nobody's told me what that number is, and I've asked. I've asked professors at Virginia Tech. I have looked at everybody's website that talks about stuff. What does it look like when we're done? And nobody can tell me. That leads me to one of 2 conclusions. One, they know and they don't want to tell me because they know it's bad. Or 2, they don't know and they haven't asked. I don't know which is worse. I would love to stand up here as an engineer and tell you this is an engineering problem. We crunch a bunch of numbers, we get a bunch of this, and this is the answer. 2 underlines, answer, done. It's not. It's not an engineering problem. It's a political and social problem. And I could put up a bunch of quotes, but this one out of Cardinal News, which is one of our online Virginia newspapers, it's pretty good. That's the title, A Showdown Over Solar is Coming to Virginia. We have some uncomfortable politics developing. Key industry in northern Virginia is dependent upon rural Virginia, particularly South Side, to make sacrifices on its behalf. And this is what you're seeing all over. Remember those laws, the Clean Economy Act, all that stuff. It was passed by our legislature. 80% of the people in Virginia live in 20% of the localities, 20% of the land. They control all of the vote. And that's what they want, and so that's what's voted. And I know what Dominion wants to do. I got some thoughts on what they're doing. Bureaucratic slow roll. Yeah, say that, but it's not going to work, so I'm just not going to comply. I'm just going to pretend. Take your money in the process. Nobody's told me that. That's just what I think's happening. But at some point, those politicians are going to say, nope, you're going to do it. I mean, they did it in New York, in Vermont, in California. Let's talk about what happens when we lose farmland. And again, this is important when your county talks about it. Farmland underlies everything we do, right? And we don't think about how collective we are as farmers. Not the communist kind of collective, the neighborly kind of collective. Think about what happens when you lose, pick a number, 500 acres of farmland. Well, there's no cows on that. The large animal veterinarian just lost a customer. We talk in here about all the problem, about the trouble with large animal veterinarians, now we don't have enough. Well, if we keep cutting their customer base, what do you think is going to happen? Feed store, tractor store, tire store, fair board, 4-H, all of these things that depend upon all those little pieces of land. The Farm Bureau. When you take a farm out of agricultural production, you put it into solar production, are they still eligible for a farm policy? How many farm policies does the State Farm Bureau need to write to be able to write farm policies? Insurance is a collective risk proposition. You got to have a big enough risk pool to share the risk. What's the minimum number of farm policies we have to write? Because what happens when our head actuary walks into the president and says, Mr. President, we can't write any more farm policies. We don't have enough farms. What do the rest of us do? Any of y'all want to operate your farm without insurance? Okay. So not only does it affect those, it affects every farmer that deals with those. And it's really simple. Take any one of these folks that's in business, walk in and say, okay, how many customers do you have? Say it's 1,000. What's your profit margin? 5%. What's 5% times 1,000? That's 50. That business is 50 customers away from going out of business, or at least a substantial reduction in size. I would submit to you, a lot of these folks are closer to that than they recognize. And when we go in and we start permitting all these things that take up farmland, we're not just letting that farmer do what that farmer wants to do with that land. We're actually we're impacting our local economy. And one of the things I've studied is actually how local economies collapse. And this is it. You lose a farm, you lose a farm, you lose a farm, you lose the feed store. And it goes da-da-da-da-da, and then something happens, and then it drops. You lose the post office, you lose the school, you lose the hospital, you lose all the things that make the community function. All right, so somebody said, all right, so what do we do about it? I don't know, I'm just a stupid farmer. We don't know the end state of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Our legislator and governor at the time started us down this road without knowing where it's going. People ask me, is this a good idea or not? It's like, I don't know, because I don't actually know what the idea is. If you told me we could achieve all the things we want to do with solar panel with 250 square miles in the Commonwealth, okay, we can have a discussion on that. But nobody's told me what the number is. It seems to be just, oh, we need another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. That's a really good idea to end up somewhere you don't want to be. Or really have our kids looking at us and say, or our grandkids and say, Granny and Gramps, why the hell did you let them do this? I think we're going to need a lot more land than we think we need. I think it's a lot more. I think it's a really big number. And part of the reason I think that was if it was a small number and it could be defended, we would have been told it. Somebody would have done the math. We haven't solved the storage problem. Supply and demand have to be in perfect balance. And the great advantage to nuclear power and gas and coal and things like that is it's got a lever. Need more, need more, need more, need less, more, less. I can do that. You can't do that with solar. If I've got more, I can connect more, but I can't make it more. And I can't store it. You say, oh, we're going to do batteries. I like DeWalt tools. DeWalt, Milwaukee, you guys like those? If you got a DeWalt drill and you're using that sucker all the time, what do you do every year? Replace the battery. They're the same thing. Every battery's got a cycle time, except the pump storage one. Right? It's still got to be maintained, but it won't cycle out. We don't know what to do with those when they cycle out. Cost-benefit analysis. I like cost-benefit analysis. I think the person that gets the benefit should pay the cost. But city folks they want the power, they want the votes, they get the benefit. We get the solar panels. We might get some money. They might throw a little bit of money our way. But what does it do to our economies? And who controls the land? Because we just had this one. This is what was told our board of supervisors. Developer says, I'm going to develop this thing, and then we're going to sell it. Who are you going to sell it to? Dominion or another Fortune 500 company? Okay. Like, wait a minute, time out, full stop. You're going to sell this lease to a company who's not from here, has never been here, doesn't see here, doesn't know here, doesn't care about here, has no interest in here, and they're going to control ever-increasing portions of our county for the next 40 years? Yeah. That's what we're doing. We don't know the end state. All right? I did. I don't want to stand up here and say something wrong. I've studied it, I've read it, I've asked. I really don't want to say something wrong. And if I had said something wrong and you know better, please correct me. Because I don't want to say things wrong, but boy, I sure would like to be wrong. I would like it to not take a third of our farmland. I've talked to people. Guy at Virginia Tech, I asked him these questions. I said, has anybody studied it? He says, no, they're not going to. I'm like, why not? Nobody will pay for it. Nobody wants to know the answer to that question, so they're not going to pay for the study. And finally, I don't know what the rest of y'all are going to eat. The least profitable thing you can do with farmland right now is farm it. You guys know that. You struggle with it every day. I got an unsolicited solicitation to put solar panels on my land. This thing, just flyer came in the mail. We'll pay you $2,700 per acre per year. That's 100 times what I could get for a pasture lease. I called him up, told him to go pound sand, had a lot of fun telling him that. But in these social discussions that we're having, in the political discussions, we are talking about carbon like it is the only problem in the world. Like it's a problem. I mean, it's what makes things grow. We're not talking about food, we're not talking about water, we're not talking about community, we're not talking about jobs. We have reduced this multidimensional problem to one thing that those people over there are going to take care of. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what to tell people. But my whole thing with it, the only thing I have to say, and this is where I'm going to end up, is if you can't tell me what's last, how much is it going to cost, what's my power bill be, what am I signing up for, I'm not going to buy it. And I'm not a climate denier, I'm not a skeptic, I'm not any of those things. I'm just a wary customer. I don't have to buy something that I don't understand. And that's it. And we got 17 minutes for questions.
Steve,
Yes, ma'am.
Renshaw from Loudoun County, home of the most data centers in Virginia. In fact, I believe about 70 to 80% of our county budget is funded by those data centers, which is why it's really hard for county governments to say no to them. If you take away 30% of farmland in Virginia, and we gross about $82 billion in revenue, the state does from that farmland, that means you're going to take away $27 billion, rough, 30% of that revenue. How does the generation of solar power equate to that number? Does it provide that kind of money in return or more? Like, what is the incentive here? Oh, can nobody hear me? I thought I could. What is the incentive to remove, or what's the equivalent in solar energy? What kind of money does that drive? Because I think people hear money more than anything else. And if you lose 30% of your $82 billion because you've lost 30% of your land, that means about $27 billion in dollar loss. How does that equate? How does the solar energy make that up? Do we know?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
And I don't think it, I can tell you the conversations I have heard about that. And it's always a conversation as, if you do X, then you will get this much money. Right? We had it in our county. Solar developer, we're going to pay you $12,000 a year in payments in lieu of taxes. Okay, well, I'm not making $12,000. I'm making $12,000 less the economic value that land would have generated otherwise. Right? The property taxes, the sales taxes, the economic value from it. Nobody ever quantifies that because it doesn't look pretty. And frankly, again, my vast experience of one board of supervisors, I've never seen my local legislators do that. I've never seen a state legislator do that. Okay, it's going to make this much money. What do we lose from this other thing? The question you ask is valid. It should be asked. It should be answered before a decision is made, because your benefit is actually the delta between the two, which might be small, or it might actually be negative. So I'm sorry for not knowing the answer to that question, but again, I don't think a lot of people do because I don't think it's being asked.
So that's something that farmers need to be asking our
Yes.
local legislators, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you stand up and say, I'm losing this.
Yes, this is Nick Moody from Dinwiddie County. I had a question. You mentioned the $2,700 an acre and lease it for annually. Kind of going off of that, plus the inefficiencies and wanting to transmit it from maybe Southside Virginia to Northern Virginia or wherever. Has anybody talked about the cost of energy this way in relation to our traditional methods? I mean, as a user of the power, it kind of scares me a little bit too, from the fact of, what's my power bill going to be if we go out and lease however many square miles of solar panels at $2,700 an acre?
Okay, that's a really good question. The developer that showed up to our county brought in something from the Energy Information Administration that showed the levelized cost of energy. I'm not sure how they calculated. I meant to look it up, but I didn't. It showed that solar energy, even without the subsidies, is about 90% of the cost of combined cycle gas-fired power energy. That's what he showed. which begged two questions, the first of which was, then why do you need the subsidy? We didn't ask that. But they compared these two things like they were the same thing. But they're not. The gas one comes with a switch. You can turn it on and off. You can control it. It's the difference between hamburger and filet mignon. And that's an issue. The biggest issue you have right now, all of us have with solar panels, is how do the lights come on at night? So let's say if I had enough solar panel to turn all the lights on in the daytime, we can't store it. We don't have the storage capacity. How do they come on at night? How do they come on in a 3-day blizzard? Well, you got to have nuclear or gas or coal or something that you can control. Okay. I don't care how much each one costs me to generate per kilowatt hour. What does the total thing cost? If I told you you had to have 2 tractors, you had to have a daytime tractor and a nighttime tractor. And the nighttime tractor could be used during the daytime sometimes, but the daytime tractor could not be used during the nighttime, and sometimes the daytime tractor won't work during the daytime. Could you make a profit? Or if you charged enough, you could. But that's what we're doing. That is flat out what we're doing. And it's not to say you can't do some productive things with solar panels, but we're talking about trying to operate a grid on it. I don't know. The other thing I don't know is, remember, when you put a generator over here where there wasn't one, and it's got a sister here and a sister there, you're going to have distribution lines to collect them up, and then you're going to have a new transmission line. And then you've got to maintain the gas plant over here because you want it to work at night and during a snowstorm, and it's got a distribution and transmission line. You don't pay for just the generation of electricity. You pay for all the generation and the distribution and the transmission and the coordination and the waste management. Because what do you do with a solar panel when it gets done? We don't know. You pay for all that. I don't know how that gets cheaper. And again, you can see this in California. The articles are, internet's great. You can read local papers from all over the country. Yes, they've got lots of solar. They've got a glut of solar. Their prices keep going up. It's more and more expensive. It's not less expensive. Not from the system perspective.
All right, I've got a question for you. It seems like a whole lot of this was generated by our General Assembly. How do we go about reversing this harm that they have put on us?
Well, it's a law. Virginia Clean Economy Act, policy of the Commonwealth, it's a law. Got to change the law. Got to elect somebody new. I hate to say it, but good luck with that. Virginia has 133 cities and counties. 11 of those constitute 50% of the population. 80% of 33 of them constitute 80% of the population. That's where the political power is. We're going to do what they say do. You got to change the law. Well, here's what I think Dominion's going to do. Now, they're never going to admit this, and I don't want to get sued for saying this, but I was in the Army. Are y'all in the Army? Right? You know the brash young lieutenant that knows everything and the old platoon sergeant? And the lieutenant shows up and says, "We're going to do this!" And the platoon sergeant says, "Go right ahead." And when he falls flat on his face, he goes, picks him up, and dusts him off, and takes care of it. I don't think the math works on this. That's Hart's opinion. And I think the power companies are just going to wait and let it fall. Okay, see, doesn't work. Would you like us to flip the switch back on this gas plant? I think that's what's going to happen. Or, the thing that I think is more hopeful, anybody remember the compact fluorescent light bulb, the CFL? You remember those got shoved on us? Government said, you must, you must, you must. And about 4 years, and everybody hated them. Can't throw them away, we threw them away anyway. And about 4 years later, the LED light bulbs came out. It's like, okay, this is something I can live with. It actually works, it's usable, it's efficient, I like it, the price is good, the technology was right. I am concerned that we're actually going to get some better nuclear technologies and better gas technologies. The most recent gas turbine I looked up is like a 63 megawatt power, all of Rockbridge County, fit in that corner of the room. It's 80% efficient. You stick your hand in the exhaust, there's no heat left in it. You just can't get much better than that. The technologies for gas and nuclear are going to get better. And when we actually start employing them, the solar technology, I think, in these massive fields is going to fall by the wayside. And then where's it left? I think that's what's going to happen. Hart's opinion, I'll see you in 15 years. We'll find out.
Hey, sir, one thing that concerns me on a political basis is our legislators going to give these dudes the power of eminent domain and force these solar panels on us.
Oops, wait a minute. You are correct. Jamie Dimon, famous rich dude, don't know him. He said, I should have put the date on here. He said that a year ago. If you actually want to do this, the volume it is going to take, eventually somebody is going to start taking land. And the question is, can they do it? Can the government take your farmland and give it to a private company to make solar panels? Yes or no? Yes. The case is Kelo versus New London of Connecticut. They can absolutely do it. Isn't that depressing? All right, we're about time because Martha's got to come up here and do her stuff. I'm here through lunch. You want to stay and talk? I'll stay and talk with you. If you got questions, I'll give you a card. I'll answer your questions. I'm not paid by anybody. I did get lunch from the Farm Bureau today, but and breakfast. But I'm not on anybody's payroll. This is my opinion. You can take it, as Paul Harvey said, for what it's worth. If you want me to come talk to your county Farm Bureau, if you'll buy me dinner, I'll come talk to you. And I certainly appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was so good. People were like, so good.
Okay.